Hi everybody, welcome to this My tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at animation. We're just going to have a look at the animation controls and a few basic concepts of animation. So first of all, what is an animation? An animation is a sequence of images that creates an illusion of movement. So it's not actually movement, it's just a sequence of still images that creates the illusion of movement. I'm not going to go too much into that, but if you're not quite sure about what animation is, please just go onto something like Wikipedia and look up animation. You can find out the basic concepts behind it there. But for now, we're just going to go with that definition, that it's a sequence of images used to create the illusion of movement. And that sequence of images, those images, are called frames. So we're going to use the concept of frames today, and also the concept of keyframes and tweening. All right, so let's have a look at what a frame is. If we look down the bottom of your Maya panel, I'm just using the Maya Classic view here. And down the bottom we have this sequence of numbers listed from, mine's listed from 1 to 120, and yours might be similarly so. So each of these numbers you can click on, and each of these represents a frame. And I don't have anything in them now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a ball to animate, and then we're going to have a look at these frames. So using your poly modeling, create a ball. It doesn't really matter if it's poly modeling. For this, I'm just going to move it up above the plane. Doesn't matter because we're not going to be interacting it with anything. I'm going to add I'll add a material to it as well. And I'll make that a AI standard surface. I'm just using everything as an AI standard surface at the moment. And in the color channel, in the base color, I'm going to give it a checker pattern. And I might make that a nice red and black checker. Red and white checker, sorry. And because I can't see mine at the moment, you may or may not be able to see yours. If you press the 6 key, that will display texture maps on your animation. Okay, good. So now we have an object. We want to animate that object. That means we want to create the illusion of movement. Okay, so what we have here is our timeline. So down the bottom we have our timeline, we have our play controls, and we have our timeline settings. So the first thing we're going to look at is frames. So each one of these frames represents one picture, and because they're not, because our ball isn't moving, they're all the same. So it's not really an animation because we're not really creating the illusion of movement. So what I need to do is create a thing called a keyframe. Now, a keyframe is a particular position that you want an object in, a position, rotation, scale, all of those things. So a particular way that you want your object set. So I set a keyframe by pressing S. So that's my keyframe. Yep. So I've set that there, but I need a second keyframe because I want it to animate between two keyframes. So I'm going to drag this all the way down to the end of my animation, which at the moment is 120, but we're going to have a look at that in a little bit. I'm going to move my object to the right, and I'm going to press S. And you can see a little red line indicating that there's two keyframes. So I have my start state keyframe, I have my end state keyframe, and I have all of these frames in between. And Maya has calculated all of these positions in between my two keyframes to work out what is called the tween. So a tween is the frames that are in between the keyframes. So if I say I'm tweening an animation, that means if I'm say my animation is tweening, that means it's going between two keyframes, animating between two keyframes. Okay, so can we see that movement? Okay, good. So going back to our definition of animation, we have a series of images or frames. And see, each one is, whoops, I pressed too high on it. So each one of these is slightly different, which creates the illusion of movement. So as I click across, each one's slightly different. And when I play this, using this play control here, it creates the illusion that the ball is moving from the left to the right of the screen. Okay, good. All right, so I can also add more keyframes. So for example, if I wanted to add a keyframe in the middle here, I can move the ball for example, up, press S, and now that's going to create a keyframe that's going to create a tween that goes up and down. So I've got a tween that also goes left to right, and then it goes up and then it goes down again. So I've actually created 3 keyframes here and 2 tweens. It's tweening from here to here, and then it's creating a tween from here to here. Now Maya does all of your tweening for you, and you can change the settings of that tween as you go. Okay, very good. So let's play that. And that's creating our illusion of our ball moving. It's kind of bouncing, but it's not really. Okay, good. The next thing I wanted to have a look at is the settings. So if I click on this little icon down below my play controls here, there's an icon with a little man and a gear. So if you click on that, it comes up with the animation settings. And the main thing we want to look at here is a thing called frame rate. The frame rate is 24 FPS, which is short for frames per second. So every second it's going to show 24 frames or 24 images. So the higher that rate, the smoother your animation is going to appear. Okay, so if I have a frame rate of 1 frame per second, that's only going to show 1 image every second, so it's going to look very blocky. If I have a frame rate of 60 frames per second, that's going to be a very smooth animation. But 24 to 30 is basically the default around the world. I'm going to use 24. That's typically been a default in Australia for a long time. So 24 frames per second is absolutely fine. So I'm going to leave that at that. So if you wanted a faster or slower animation, that's absolute. This is where you change your frame rate. Okay, so I've got 24 frames per second. All right, so that means that approximately 100 frames is approximately 4 seconds. So our animation, we can make our animation go for longer or shorter. Okay, so that brings us to our next bar, which is down the bottom here. We've got a 1, 2 ones, and 2 numbers on the side here. And this indicates the length of our animation. Our animation goes from frame 1 through to frame, the far one, 200. Okay, so 200, if you divide that by 24, let's divide by 25 to be easier with the mathematics. So that's approximately 8 seconds of animation. Yeah. So if I wanted my animation to go for around 10 seconds, I can make that 250. Or you can use a calculator if you want to work out exactly. It's 240, oh, maybe 240. Actually, yeah, 240 obviously would be 10 seconds. Okay. And these 2 numbers in the middle are the frames that we're focused in on. So you might just focus in on a section of your animation. And if I expand my entire animation, you can see each one of these frames is very small and hard to click on. So these 2 center numbers represent the section that you're focused in on. I'm just going to click off that to get that. So I can focus in on a very short section of animation, or I can focus in on the entire timeline. So that's what these 4 numbers indicate: the start of the animation, the end of the animation, and the start of the section that you're focused on and the end of the section you're focused on. So because these 2 are the same, I'm looking at my whole animation. But if, for example, I've got 100 through to 150, I'm looking at those 50 frames, so I can give that more focus. Okay, good. So let's play my animation. Okay, good. So you can see at the end here, it's not actually doing anything. It's not actually doing anything. It's because my last keyframe is at 120 frames. So if I wanted to extend that out, I can right-click on that, cut my keyframe, and paste that in at 250. Okay, and I play my animation. Okay, good. So now you can see this first bit, the ball moves up very fast and then comes down slow, and that's reflected in my actual animation here because I've got these 2 keyframes close together and these 2 keyframes far apart. And if I want to see all of my keyframes, I can just use these controls next to the play controls to just skip between each keyframe. Or if I want to step by 1 frame at a time, I can just use this little button next to that to skip ahead 1 frame at a time. So this is really good. These controls are really good for just focusing in on an animation. Cool. All right. Now, I'm going to have a quick look at the attributes of this object. When I look at in my attribute editor, I can see the object, and you can see that the transform, rotate, and scale attributes are all in red, and that indicates that all of these attributes have got a keyframe. So, if you ever see an object that's red, that indicates that it's keyframed. Now, I'm actually moving the object. You can see along the X and Y axes, translate X and Y. So you can see these are the only two that are actually changing in value. So these other ones don't really need to be keyframed. So I can just, if I didn't want them to be keyframed, I can break connection. And because these don't actually do anything, I'm not actually animating the scale. That doesn't affect me. I can also break the attribute of the rotate because it's not actually rotating. Okay, so we can use our attributes here to make more specific animations. So if I wanted this ball to roll, I would want to rotate that object. So what I can do is, instead of setting a keyframe down here with S, I can just right click and choose set key, S. So that's what S stands for, set key. And then I can go to my last frame and I can set that to, say, 360, for example. Whoops, that's too big. Right click and set key. So when I play this animation, it's rotating 360 degrees, but it's actually rotating the wrong way. So I want to set that to negative 360, right click and set key. Let's try that again. Oops, it's gone the wrong way again. Sometimes you need to sort of give it a little bit of a hint. So what I might do in the middle here, we can change this with the we can change this with some more detail later on, but just for the meantime, I can just set a one in the middle here called negative 180. And because my is working out the tweens, we can sort of give it a little bit of a helping hand. It's determined to go. It's determined to move upwards. That's all right. We can change that later in the next in the next one. So when Maya is working out these tweens, when Maya works out these tweens, quite often it'll actually go the opposite direction to what you want. So we can change that in our animation editors to fix it up in later tutorials. So for now, I want to get rid of this keyframe here. And let's just have a rolling ball. And our ball is actually rolling the opposite direction of what it's supposed to, but that doesn't matter for now. So I might just change the start and end of this. Set key. Set key. Now ball's rolling the right way. Awesome. So to conclude, what we've looked at today is we've looked at animation being a sequence of images to create the illusion of movement. And that's what we've done here. We've done a sequence of images to create the illusion of movement. This sequence of images are broken down into things called frames. And we play back our frames at typically around 25 to 30 frames per second. So we have that sequence of images happening very fast to create that illusion of movement. We set things called keyframes to set our important states of animation. So which are denoted in red here. And Maya works out the tweens, which are the frames in between. It automatically calculates the movement between those two. And sometimes, as we've seen in this tutorial, it takes the wrong path. Next tutorial, we're going to be looking at making this tweening motion a bit more specific using the thing called the graph editor. Okay, so that concludes this tutorial. Thank you very much.